Roll call for day 3, February 14th, 2024. Anderson.
Here.
Baldwin.
Here.
Barlow.
Here.
Beitman. Boner. Bouchard. Brennan. Case. Cooper. Dockstetter. Ellis. French. Murphy. Guru. Hicks. Hutchings. Ide. Jones. Kinski. Kolb. Landon. Larson. McEwen.
Here.
Nethercott. Pappas. Rothfuss. Salazar. Schuler. Scott. Steinmetz. Kolb. Excused. And President Driscoll.
Here.
30 present, 1 excused.
Prayer by Pastor Sean Sells.
Morning, let's pray. Heavenly Father, it's so wonderful to be able to trust in you with all that is going on in our lives, in our minds, and in our hearts today, Lord. I would pray that your great wisdom would be granted to each of us as we know how best to move forward. Today, Lord, we in particular want to pray for the family of Sergeant Nevada Krinke and the loss of his life and duty. Lord, we would pray for him that we could entrust his soul to you. Lord, we would pray for his wife Carla and for their young child, Lord, that you would begin to do the work of bringing healing into their life as they're grieving, Lord. Lord, the next number of years they're going to need the help of the citizens of the state, their friends, their family, and you, Lord. Father, we also pray for those officers who are still engaged in the scene there, that you would bring this to an end quickly, that the truth would be found and that justice would be brought. And Father, we also pray for each of the individuals that are serving here today. Each one has given up something so that they can be here to serve this community. Each one has given up their time or their energy, stepped away from jobs or farms. Lord, that they would be honored for their service, that they would be able to be guided by you, Lord. Again, we pray for your wisdom as they look at each bill today. Every bill that comes before them will be important to somebody. Lord, we pray that wisdom would prevail and the right things would be accomplished. Father, we thank you. I love you. In the name of my great God and Savior, Jesus Christ, we pray. Amen.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Reading, correction, and approval of journal.
Mr. President, your Journal Committee reports that the Journal of February 13, 2024 has been read and recommends that it be approved. Senator Larson, Chairman.
Are there any objections? Being none, report is adopted. Doctor of the day is Rage Geringer, MD. I don't know if he's here or not, but yeah, it's our doctor of the day. No nurse of the day. Today in Wyoming history. I'm going to butcher one of the words in here. I looked at it already. Most popular legend says that Valentine's Day originated from the Roman festival of Lupercalia, held in mid-February. It was celebrated during the onset of spring, wherein women were paired with men through a lottery. It's been around a long time. Pope Gelasius I replaced this festival with St. Valentine's Day. It has been celebrated as a day of romance since about mid-14th century. Quote for the day: love doesn't make the world go around. Love is what makes the ride worthwhile. So today, quick warning, noon deadline for all bill drafts. So if you've got a bill that's coming out, noon today is your last chance. Senator Case.
Mr. Chairman, it is Valentine's Day, and I'm an expert on that one. And I wish everybody a happy Valentine's Day. It's also a very important day, kind of also in the spring theme, Mr. President. This weekend at home, I was heading to Fort Washakie on Sunday morning, and I saw my first calves. And that was a pretty big deal, I got to thinking, well, there's something great in the air, and we are, of course, getting close to the Easter season. I don't know that you noticed that. That's an important sign of spring. But the biggest sign of spring of all, the most important one, is that pitchers and catchers report. So today, great teams are showing up in Arizona. All the ones you love. The Rockies are going in tomorrow, but the Cubs, the White Sox, the Twins, man, we are talking big season. I'm very encouraged. I'll tell you, the California folks, they use our electricity and they started pitchers and catchers early. They cheated. They showed up on Sunday and Friday, but we're not going to let that bother us. We're going to get in there and have a great year. Happy spring training, Mr. President.
Thanks, Senator Case. Senator Salazar.
Personal privilege, Mr. President.
Privilege.
Honorable Senators, we have a internationally best-selling author here today. Not only is she a friend, but she's going to be with us for 2 days. Miss Naomi Wolf, who's in the gallery, some of you may know her book that was written in 1991 called The Beauty Myth, which made her very famous. One of the books that I enjoyed of hers, Give Me Liberty, which was a book that looks at the times and places in history where citizens faced the closing of an open society and successfully fought back. Ms. Wolf is here for the next 2 days to talk about election integrity and transparency. And I know that she would love to have a couple minutes with each of you to talk about her thoughts. She's going throughout the country, the state of Maine, Alabama, Georgia. So she's here today and tomorrow. And if you would be gracious to give her a few minutes, I know she would love to meet you and say hello. And so with that, honorable members, if you could give her a nice Senate welcome, I'd appreciate it. Ms. Naomi Campbell.
Welcome, Ms. Wolf. Senator Pappas.
Thank you, Mr. President. Today, I'd like to introduce someone who's sitting on the floor here with me. As you know, or you may not know, I along with our Chief Clerk and Dick Morrison, do work at Girls State, mentoring the girls this summer. And I have the privilege to have met many great Wyoming 11th graders who've attended that program. Some are here today, so I see them up in the gallery. But one in particular happened to ask me to be her sponsor as a legislative intern. So from Lander, Wyoming, we have Avery Beaver. She's a senior this year. She's aspires to, she's put her application into the Naval Academy and to the other academies. So I'm hoping she succeeds there, but wants to come back to Wyoming and become an attorney. So please help me welcome my legislative intern, Avery Beaver.
Here, here. Senator Kinski.
Thank you, Mr. President. Privilege of the floor, please.
Granted.
Folks, in terms of budget, we're going to kick off the budget bill tomorrow. And I just wanted to highlight for you some of the resources that are available to you. Of course, you've got the SR report. That's the big spreadsheet. And you've got the budget bill itself, Senate File 1. And then I've asked staff to re-email out to everybody a link to the original budget request of the governor. It's a PDF that is 4,473 pages long. But where it's helpful is sometimes you'll see an agency in DEQ and you say, gee, I'd like to understand what the particular ask was all about. You can go to that budget and see the page or the paragraph where they've written up the rationale for that. The other resource that's available, of course, is the members of your Joint Appropriations Committee and staff. So we have two staff that are assigned to the Senate side of the budget presentation. That's Elizabeth Martineau. I think many of you know Elizabeth. She's available for questions if you can catch her. She moves very, very quickly. And Catherine Camerati, and Catherine is in here with the attorneys. You know, they call it the bullpen. I think we ought to have a better name than that, but that's what people call it, the bullpen. And Catherine's there and she works on amendments as well as the attorneys. So in terms of questions about the budget, feel free to ask Elizabeth and Catherine questions as well. And then I just wanted to bring one thing to your attention. You have 3 sheets that were distributed and they'll be redistributed again when we get to the budget. I don't like anybody to feel surprised. We come to a lot of little teeny tiny agencies and a lot of courts where there's just no change in their budget. So we make one or two motions in mass to just approve them. And those are the district courts. And then we have a lot of these boards that are funded by fees that are assessed on the members of the boards. They haven't made any change in their budgets. So we will, the final page is some agencies that did make some minor changes in their budgets, and we will go through those. It's just when you see 40 agencies go boom in one fell vote, you may say, now what just happened there? And so I just like to, before we get to that part of the budget, I just like you to know, give you a heads up. And if there's some of those agencies that you actually want to pull off and discuss, you're free to do so. And with that, Mr. President, I will have my seat. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to be hearing a lot from you soon.
Mr. President, privilege of the floor.
Granted.
Thank you, Mr. President. So members, joining us today is the Council of State Governments West. The Director Edgar Ruiz is up in the balcony and John Lenartz is not up there in the balcony. They are conducting their state visit, finding out what their services are. This year's conference is going to be in Portland, Oregon, July 9th to the 12th. And next year's will be in Wyoming under the chairmanship of Representative Mike Yin. So I'd encourage you to touch bases with Edgar and Jonathan as they're here. WLA members, toll members, fellowships, and perspectives. There's a luncheon today from 11 to 1 in room W108. So thank you for being here, Edgar, and look forward to the members touching bases with you. Thank you.
So now I'm going to go just a little further. Anybody that's been through the WLA's program at the Academy, stand up. There's a number of you out here, I know. Incredible program. So as you guys look around the room, it's only available to basically the freshmen. And I encourage any of you that are in your terms, take a look at it. It's unbelievable good training. If you look through past speakers, presidents, and a lot of the guys have done stuff, they've come through this academy. And it's really good. And sometimes we got to kind of twist people's arms to get into it. And I really encourage anyone that qualifies to take a run through it. Terry, you're not standing. You went through it, didn't you? All right. Well, once again, it's a good one. Senator Hicks, did you have something? Okay, thought I saw you stand. All right. Introduction of bills. You have my script. Senate File 45, first reading of the Senate File.
Senate File 45, Vulnerable Adults, Civil Cause of Action 2, sponsored by Senator Nethercott.
Senator Nethercott, Senate File 45.
I move for the introduction of Senate File 45. Vulnerable Adults, Civil Causes of Action 2. Good senators, what you have before you is interim committee work from the Mental Health and Vulnerable Adult Task Force. And so all the co-sponsors on this bill were members of that task force. And so this bill represents that work, and due to challenges associated with committee timing and when this bill was ready for prime time for your consideration, we didn't have a standing committee to have the opportunity to review it. And so I opted to take it as an individual bill. But good senators, I can't stress to you enough how important I think this bill is, in that it provides a valuable tool for anyone who has an interest in protecting a vulnerable adult, including the vulnerable adult themselves, from potential exploitation that may be beyond the abilities of law enforcement at the time to investigate for criminal activity, and may be beyond something related to a power of attorney. And those are really the only two avenues we have right now in our laws. And so this affords a civil cause of action associated with that abuse of that vulnerable adult, and allows different individuals to bring that type of cause of action forward. Again, I would consider this a committee bill worked in the interim. I hope to be able to explain the details of it to you further. Look forward to your favorable consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Clerk will call the roll.
Introductory roll call, Senate File 45. Anderson?
Aye.
Aye. Baldwin? Aye. Barlow? Aye. Beitman? Aye. Boner? Aye. Bouchard? Aye. Brennan? Aye. Case?
Aye.
Aye. Cooper?
Aye.
Aye. Dockstader?
Aye.
Aye. Ellis?
Aye.
Aye. French? Aye. Murphy? Aye. Guru? Aye. Hicks? Aye. Hutchings? Aye. Ide? Aye. Jones? Pinsky? Aye. Cole? Aye. Landon? Aye. Larson? Aye. McEwen? Aye. Nethercott? Aye. Pappas? Aye. Rothfuss? Aye. Salazar? Aye. Schuler? Aye. Scott? Aye. Steinmetz? Aye. Jones? Aye. President Driscoll?
Aye.
Aye. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 4531 aye.
Senate File 45, having received the required approval of 2/3 of the elected members, Senate File 45 is assigned to Committee Number 1, Judiciary. Senate File 53, first reading of the file.
Senate File 53, 6th Judicial District, number of judges, sponsored by Senator Landon.
Senator Landon.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would move introduction of Senate File 53. Fellow senators, this is a bill that comes to you as an individual bill simply because of the timing last fall. Otherwise, I feel confident it would have been a judiciary bill. This was a judge's position which was approved by the previous Appropriations Committee a couple of years ago. But up in the northeast part of the state, up in your neighborhood, Mr. President, there was not an adequate facility to house this particular judge. And so what has happened by the end of last year, Campbell County and the commissioners up there, very devoted to this and very committed to it, went ahead and completed construction on a courthouse, on a new courtroom up there. That requires an approval from the Chief Justice. She made that trip up late in the fall and has approved that facility. And so it only awaits the sanction of the Wyoming legislature. Rather than try to go through a budget process, we thought it was more appropriate that we bring it this way. You'll see a couple of other members of the Judiciary Committee on the bill, and the good senator from Albany County, but it really, this is a judiciary issue. I would hope that you'd support the bill, and we can certainly learn more from legislators in the northeast part of the state with regard to this judge's position if the bill moves along. So I hope you'll support it.
Chief Clerk, call the roll.
Introduction, Senate File 53. Anderson? Aye. Baldwin? Aye. Barlow? Aye. Beitman? Aye. Boner? I, Bouchard.
Aye.
I, Brennan. I, Case. No. Cooper. I, Dockstetter. I, Ellis. I, French. I, Murphy. I, Baru. I, Hicks. No. Hutchings. I, no. Jones. I, Kinsky. I, Cole. I, Landon.
Aye.
I, Larson. I, McEwen. I, Nethercott. I, Pappas. I, Rothfuss. I, Salzar. I, Schuler. I, Scott. I, Steinmetz. I, President Driscoll.
Aye.
Aye. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 53, 28 aye, 3 no.
Senate File 53, having received the required approval of 2/3 of the elected members, has passed the Senate. Senate File 53 will go to Committee 1, Judiciary. Senate File 57, first reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 57, Wyoming Adult Hearing Aid Program, sponsored by Senator Furphy.
Senator Furphy.
Thank you, Mr. President. You all may remember this bill from last year, and I felt like I let down this group. Last year, we had a group of the deaf and hearing impaired show up to our committee meeting, and they'd arranged for an interpreter, etc. I continued to work with that group because we voted that down last year because we were trying to mandate insurance companies to provide hearing aids. So in the meantime, I worked with the health department and we came up with this proposal to take care of the most vulnerable adults. And what this bill does is it makes available funding through the Department of Health. And it's not a lot of money, it's $90,000. But it takes care of those who are 200% below the poverty level. So most of them can't afford hearing aids themselves. And the Department of Health will determine their qualifications. So the Department of Health will make sure they don't qualify under Medicare, Medicaid, or any insurance program. So these people are stuck. They really don't have a way of getting hearing aids, and they really need help. So this bill proposes that, and the Department of Health, there's 90,000 for the hearing aids and one person in the Department of Health to deal with these people. As you recall last time we talked about, we're the only state in the country that doesn't have a commission for the deaf. So we're taking care of that by having a part-time person in the Department of Health, and it will cost $9,000 for the 2-year period. And so I visited with the Department of Health. They feel comfortable they can do all that and get these individuals covered with hearing aids. So, Mr. President, I move approval of Senate File 57, Wyoming Adult Hearing Aid Program, and ask for your consideration.
Thanks, Senator Furphy. Roll call, please.
For introduction, Senate File 57, Anderson. Aye. Baldwin. Aye. Barlow. Aye. Beitman. No. Boner. Aye. Bouchard. No. Brennan. No. Case. Aye. Cooper. Aye. Dockstetter. No. Ellis. Aye. French. No. Furphy. Aye. Baru. Aye. Hicks? Aye. Hutchings? Aye. Ide? No. Jones? Aye. Kinsky? No. Cole? Aye. Landon? Aye. Larson? No. McEwen? No. Nethercott? Aye. Pappas? Aye. Rothfuss? Aye. Salazar? Aye. Schuler? Aye. Scott? Aye. Steinmetz? No. President Driscoll?
Aye.
Aye. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 57, 21 aye, 10 no.
21 make it, Ellen? Running through my head. I was asking advice. I'm not a very good mathematician. I'm making sure I'm not making an error. So Senate File 57, having received the required approval of 2/3 of elected members, Senate File 57 is assigned to committee number 10. Senate File 69, first reading of the Senate file. Congratulations, Senator Furphy. Senator Biden. I'm looking.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just wanted to do a point of order, but I didn't want to interrupt the good senator from the front row. But I've remembered we've had some issues with how we turn to the back to address members. We've been chastised before to make sure we address the chair, we face the chair. And I didn't want to cut him off, but just as a friendly reminder that that's the decorum that we usually follow in this body. And I would just ask that we would be reminding each other to address the chair. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Notice to the body on that. Thanks much. Senator Case.
Mr. President, commenting on a point of order. I think that's a little bit over the top and we have to respect this chamber. And if you're stuck in the front row and you have to look and stand on this side of your desk and look at the wall on you, sir, which is very good to look at, that's kind of not fair. And I get to stand back here and I can glance at you, but I can look at everybody in the eye. I think what's really important is that we use our microphones so that everybody knows and that we do direct our remarks through the chair, but to have to stand and face the chair all the time is a great disadvantage to our senators in their front rows. So I hope we would be lenient with that. The notion of addressing the chair, I don't know when it became that you have to face the chair. We have very senior senators that face away from the chair and unfortunately away from their microphones too. But I think we need to be lenient with this. And it's about respect for all of us.
Thank you, Senator Case. Yeah, I'm quite lenient as far as I am. Disrespect to the chair will be taken pretty seriously, but as far as trying to address the body, we all get it. We're here, and I'm pretty good. I don't want to offend point of order, but the truth is, I really want all of you, and you've seen it on the floor. I want everybody to have the best chance they can to have their bill presented to the entire body, and as long as it's done with respect, I'm going to be pretty good on it. So thank you. Senate File 77, first read. Oh, let's go.
Senate File 69, hospice care reimbursements, sponsored by Senator Landon.
Senator Landon.
Mr. President, thank you. I would move Senate File 69 for introduction hospice care reimbursements and ask for the body's favorable consideration. Let me just say, first of all, thank you to the senators for good wisdom shared a few minutes ago. Appreciated all of that. Regarding this little Senate file, senators, feels like yesterday, the day that I was in a rehabilitation hospital in Casper. And that was the day that my dad finally ran out of gas, Mr. President. He he was done. And as heartbreaking as that was, it was more heartbreaking to know that I wasn't sure what to do at that point. He needed more than I could give him at our home. And my beautiful wife, Robin, even with her help, we knew that we couldn't take it on ourselves. And we were a little lost for a minute. And fortunately, we knew somebody at the Hospice and Transition Center in Casper. And we checked with them, and my dad qualified, and we moved him there. And it was almost like the angels arrived, Mr. President. And I thought to myself then that if I ever had an opportunity to help with that continuum of care, what we're talking about in hospice care, Mr. President, is the very end of the line, the opportunity for us to check out on our own terms. And they're absolutely remarkable at what they do. And if I could ever help, well, that's what this is. Senate file in front of you today is all about the fact that we reimburse nursing homes at 100% of the Medicaid level, and hospice care gets only 50% of that. And that's kind of ironic, fellow senators, because hospice care actually ends up saving us money. Because if somebody goes into hospice care, it's less expensive than if we leave them in a hospital. So it didn't make any sense to me. And I thought, you know, and it's not much fiscal impact. This bill will have about $100,000 a year impact on our budget. But it means so much to those 5 facilities out across our state. Let me tell you about the facility in my neighborhood real quickly, and I know we're running out of time. The day that Dad was in his room and checked in, there was a family from Bags right there beside him. And I talked to those folks, and they were so grateful because they didn't have the financial ability to go anywhere else. And they ended up there in Casper. This last year, 14 different counties were served by that service there in my community. 2 years ago, 16 different counties. Anyway, I will stop there, Mr. President. This is close to my heart, but it's also, I hope you'll support it because it is a budget bill, and I'd love to get the input of our Labor and Health Committee and take it on to our Appropriations Committee for their thoughts. But I hope you'll support Senate File 69 for introduction. Thank you.
Senator Landon, I may have missed it, but I'm not sure we got a motion on that.
Just to make sure, Mr. President, I would move introduction for Senate File 69. And
Thank
ask
you
for
very
a
much.
favorable vote. Thank you.
Appreciate it. You may have done it. I've kind of lax, so roll call.
For introduction, Senate File 69, Anderson. I, Baldwin. I, Barlow. I, Whitman. I, Boner. I, Bouchard. I, Brennan. I, Case. I, Cooper. I, Dockstetter. I, Ellis. I, French. I, Furphy. I, Guru. I, Hicks. I, Hutchings. I, Ide. No, Jones. I, Kinsky. I, Cole. I, Landon.
Aye.
I, Larson. I, McEwen. I, Nethercott. I, Pappas. I, Rothfuss. I, Salazar. I, Schuler. I, Scott. I, Steinmetz. I, President Driscoll.
Aye.
Aye. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 69, 30 aye, 1 no.
Senate File 69, having received the required approval of 2/3 of the elected members, Senate File 69 is referred to Committee Number 10, Labor Health. Senate File 77, first reading of the file.
Senate File 77, Homeland Defense, Infrastructure Reporting and Investigating, sponsored by Senator Nethercott.
Senator Nethercott.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for introduction of Senate File 77, Critical Infrastructure investigating and reporting and defending the homeland. Good senators, this is a very important bill. I've been working extensively with the stakeholders in this community, with our military partners and with our executive branch, recognizing the significant concerns we have regarding critical infrastructure and foreign ownership of lands surrounding critical infrastructure. Key piece of information I want to share with everyone right now. There are a number of bills on this topic in both chambers, I think demonstrating the importance of this issue for our state. In my view, and quick read of some of the ones yesterday, this bill does not conflict. So you're not having to pick favorites. And so really important understanding of how they may complement each other. And I think that may be the case. But what the bill does is it enables a reporting system of when land transfers occur within specific areas that have been designated critical infrastructure. And then in the event there is requisite suspicion, or reasonable suspicion we call, allows our law enforcement partners to investigate that further. Because they're really the only entities within our government that have the ability to understand who may actually be behind those land transactions and who may actually be that threat. And so really important to understand. I look forward to explaining the issue with you further. Look forward to your support on this very important bill for our state and for Laramie County. And thank you.
Clerk will call the roll.
For introduction, Senate File 77, Anderson. Aye. Baldwin. Aye. Barlow. Aye. Boner. Aye. Bouchard. Aye. Brennan. Aye. Case. No. Cooper. Aye. Dockstetter. Aye. Ellis. Aye. French. Aye. Murphy. Aye. Guru. Aye. Hicks. Aye. Hutchings. Aye. Ide. Aye. Jones. Aye. Kinsky. Aye. Cole. Aye. Landon. Aye. Larson. Aye. McEwen. Aye. Nethercott. Aye. Pappas. Aye. Rothfuss. Aye. Salazar. Aye. Schuler. Aye. Scott. Aye. Steinmetz. Aye. President Driscoll.
Aye.
Aye. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 77, 30 aye, 1 no.
Senate File 77 have received the required approval of 2/3 of the elected members. Has passed the body. I refer Senate File 77 to Committee Number 1, Judiciary. Senate File 92, first reading of Senate File.
Senate File 92, Registered Sex Offender Employment Restrictions, sponsored by Senator Ellis.
Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move introduction of Senate File 92 and would ask the body to vote aye. This issue was brought to me by a constituent. Senators, you might recall about 10 years ago, the Wyoming legislature passed a law which prohibited certain registered sex offenders from being on K-12 property, including school buses, with some exceptions if permission were obtained from the school's principal for certain things. This was brought to me, however, by a constituent who noticed that there are a number of places in our community where there are a large number of children that congregate, anywhere from daycares, places, fast food places that hire a lot of teenagers, arcades. And she was very aware of a situation where a known registered sex offender had employment that required that individual to be very much involved with a lot of underage workers. So what this would do, Mr. President, would be to provide a prohibition for registered sex offenders, for those involving a minor victim, to no longer accept or engage in any kind of paid or unpaid employment that requires that offender to interact primarily or directly with coworkers who are minors. It also would provide a prohibition on such employment or volunteer positions if that offender had to provide services primarily and directly to unaccompanied minors. And so if you think of situations like daycares, that's the question. Should we really have registered sex offenders who have committed crimes against children providing daycare services to kids? It wouldn't though if the child or the minors were accompanied by parents. So if you had a registered sex offender who worked at a restaurant and was a waiter, they're serving food to families. That's the primary purpose of that, isn't just to do or provide meals to teenagers. Recognizing that there might be some exceptions, it would allow that registered sex offender to petition a court if they believe these provisions shouldn't apply to their particular employment. And it would only apply prospectively. For example, if you have this employment or volunteer position currently, it wouldn't apply until you were let go of that position or left that position and sought a new one. Happy to work on some additional amendments, but this bill I think is in pretty good shape. It's modeled after what we did largely with K through 12 property, and I'd ask for your aye vote.
Senator Ellis, roll call.
For introduction, Senate File 92. Anderson. Aye. Baldwin. Aye. Barlow. Aye. Beitman. Aye. Boner. Aye. Bouchard. Aye. Brennan. Brennan, no. Case. No. Cooper. Aye. Dockstader. Aye. Ellis. Aye. French. Aye. Murphy. Aye. Guru. Aye. Hicks. Aye. Hutchings. Aye. Ide. Aye. Jones. Aye. Kinsky. Aye. Cole. Aye. Landon. Aye. Larson. Aye. McEwen. Aye. Nethercott. Aye. Pappas. Aye. Rothfuss. Aye. Salazar. Aye. Schuler. Aye. Scott. Aye. Steinmetz. Aye. President Driscoll.
Aye.
Aye. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 92, 29 aye, 2 no.
Senate File 92, having received the required approval of 2/3 of the elected members, Senate File 92 has passed the Senate, is referred to Committee Number 1, Judiciary. Senate File 93, first reading of the Senate file. Senator Case.
Excuse me, Mr. President, but you said pass the Senate and
Thank you.
yes, sir. Thank you.
Correction has received the required votes for introduction. Thank you. Great point, by the way. Tried to fast track your bill, Senator Ellis.
Senate File 93, Wyoming Dividend Account, sponsored by Senator Ellis.
Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move introduction of Senate File 93. This bill, senators, comes as a result of a lot of conversations I've had with people, not just in Wyoming, but across the country, particularly those who are critical of our boom bust economy. And when I talk about how Wyoming is a great place and how we've really learned how to manage through that boom bust, it's a source of pride. I think all of us are very familiar with the fact that our legislative stabilization reserve account, or the LSRA rainy day fund, however you want to term it, when you compare it to other states, Wyoming could survive on our savings for, depending on the year, roughly up to a year. And that's something to be proud of. I think other states, when they do their analysis, some states could survive a month, some states 2 weeks, some states a day, some states a couple of hours. So when you put it in that perspective, again, we have much to be proud of. But I think it begs the question, colleagues, of how much do we need to save? We are not a bank. And what we see often is, some excess funding being determined how we spend that as a state. I think if you talk to some of your colleagues in this room, they would say, and certainly I've heard this, that sometimes we indulge in some luxury spending. And as I'm looking at our discussion about property tax, people are struggling right now. As when I go to the grocery store, I look in how much groceries other people are buying, and people are living lean. I'm hearing from my constituents that they're having a difficult time paying for groceries, paying for their utilities, and covering their increased property taxes. So unlike the property tax discussion, this takes a little bit of a different turn. Property tax, as we know, primarily funds our K through 12 schools. But when we get revenue on the state side, it's really hard to figure out how to backfill that or provide relief to tax-paying citizens. So what this would do, Mr. Chairman, it's a page from our neighbors in the frontier state, the last frontier state, who offer a dividend payment to their constituents. Doing some research on this bill, certainly that particular legislation up in the Pacific Northwest, north of that, They've had some growing pains. We've learned a lot about their experiences, but this would set some parameters of who we would be providing a refund to. Citizens of the United States, bona fide Wyoming residents who have been here for at least a year, have not claimed any residence in other states, and those who are not dependents on anybody else's federal tax returns. And so what this would do, the meat of the bill occurs on page 4. This would say that after we've exceeded the 2.5% of our current spending policy, that up to 0.5% would be set aside within the LISRA just for savings. And so this is really a toe in the water. It doesn't authorize the spending yet. The point would be to continue to save that money, invest that money. And at some point, once we figure out the particulars with the Department of Revenue, and it makes sense for the legislature in their estimation in the future years to provide a payment, that they could do so to qualifying citizens. So I think this is an alternative that really addresses things that I'm hearing in my community about people struggling to pay for some of their bare necessities. So I'd ask your aye vote.
Roll call.
Introduction of Senate File 93, Anderson. Aye. Baldwin. No. Barlow. No. Whitman. Aye. Boner. Aye. Bouchard. No. Brennan. Aye. Aye. Case. No. Cooper. No. Dockstetter. Aye. Ellis. Aye. French. No. Furphy. Aye. Guru. Aye. Hicks.
No.
No. Hutchings. No. Ide. No. Jones. No. Kinsky. No. Cole. No. Landon. No. Larson. No. McEwen. No. Nethercott. Aye. Pappas. Aye. Rothfuss. No. Salazar. No. Schuler. Aye. Scott. No. Steinmetz. No. President Driscoll.
Aye.
Aye. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 93, 12 aye, 19 no.
Senate File 93, having failed to receive the 2/3 majority vote, has failed introduction. Senate File 94, first reading in the Senate file.
Senate File 94, an act regarding compelled speech and state employers, sponsored by Senator Hutchings.
Senator Hutchins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move for the introduction of Senate File 94. It's an act regarding compelled speech and state employers. This was brought to me by my constituents, or a few of them, a couple of years ago, and again this summer, so I decided to run it. This bill regards a prohibition from a state employer in compelling an employee to use an employee's preferred pronoun. We're up to over 100 pronouns from our traditional pronouns. And this prohibition would be that they cannot say if you don't use these pronouns, you won't be able to continue your employment. You won't be able to receive grants or receive adverse threats. This is also accompanied by a civil action, and that's it, Mr. Chairman. I'd ask for a favorable aye vote. Thank you.
Can you actually do a formal move for introduction?
Yes, sir, I did, but I'll do it again. I move Senate File 94, an act regarding compelled speech and state employees. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Well done. Thank you. Roll call.
For introduction, Senate File 94, Anderson. Aye. Baldwin. Aye. Barlow. No. Whitman. Aye. Boner. Aye. Bouchard. Aye. Brennan. Aye. Case. No. Cooper. No. Dockstetter. Aye. Ellis. Aye. French. Aye. Furphy. Aye. Guru. No. Hicks? Aye. Hutchings? Aye. Ide? Aye. Jones? Aye. Kinsky? Aye. Cole? Aye. Landon? No. Larson? Aye. McEwen? Aye. Nethercott? Aye. Pappas? Aye. Rothfuss? No. Salazar? Aye. Schuler? Aye. Scott? Aye. Steinmetz? Aye. President Driscoll?
Aye.
Aye. Closing vote? Cooper, no to aye. Guru, no to aye. Landon, no to aye. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 94, 28 aye, 3 no.
Senate File 94, having received the required approval of 2/3 of the elected members of the body, Senate File 94 is approved for introduction and is referred to Committee Number 1, Judiciary. Senate File 95, first reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 95, teacher tenure, sponsored by Senator Hicks.
Senator Hicks.
Mr. President, I move for introduction, Senate File 95, teacher tenure. Members of the Senate, this would eliminate the statutory requirement that tenured teachers have a contract right for employment. Would also remove the statutory requirement that tenured teachers shall be employed by a school district. It provides that districts may terminate a tenured teacher for any reason not specifically prohibited by the laws. It provides districts the opportunity to enter into a contract with any teacher for up to 4 years. It sets up an appeals process for any terminated or suspended teacher to appeal a decision before the school board. It further sets up an additional appeals process of the board, and under that appeals process, they would go through the district court and follow the current procedures we have in the Administrative Procedures Act. Would ask for your favorable consideration for introduction.
Chief Clerk, call the roll.
For introduction, Senate File 95, Anderson. Aye. Baldwin. Aye. Barlow. No. Whitman. Aye. Boner. Aye. Bouchard. Aye. Brennan. Aye. Aye. Case. No. Cooper. Aye. Aye. Dockstetter. Aye. Ellis. Aye. French. Aye. Murphy. Aye. Guru. No. Hicks.
Aye.
Aye. Hutchings. Aye. Ide. Aye. Jones. Aye. Kinsky. Aye. Cole. Aye. Landon. Aye. Larson. No. McEwen. Aye. Nethercott. Aye. Pappas. Aye. Rothfuss. No. Salazar. Aye. Schuler. No. Scott. Aye. Steinmetz. Aye. President Driscoll.
Aye.
Aye. Ellis, aye to no. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 95, 24 aye, 7 no.
Senate File 95, having received the required approval of 2/3 of the body, has passed introduction and is referred to Committee Number 4, Education. Senate File 96, first reading. Introduction.
Senate File 96, trusts and bank assets in bankruptcy clarification, sponsored by Senator Rothfuss.
Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I move for the introduction of Senate File 96, Trusts and Bank Assets in Bankruptcy Clarification, and ask the body's favorable consideration. Mr. President, this was legislation that was worked through the Blockchain Select Committee during the interim, but we didn't have it quite finalized prior to the cutoff for our last meeting, so we took this on as an individual bill. What this legislation does is clarify very explicitly that assets held in custody by financial institutions, so those are going to be primarily your banks and trusts, are not the property of those financial institutions for the purpose of bankruptcy hearing to the greatest extent the state is capable of doing. So for banking, for example, you end up in federal bankruptcy more often than not. So we don't have total say over what goes into that final bankruptcy hearing at the federal level, but we do have influence over those decisions that are made. So the purpose of this is to make it very clear that the assets of those that are depositing the assets into a financial institution are their own assets and not those of the banks for the purposes of bankruptcy. Keep it very clean, very separate, and that will avoid a lot of legal challenges and holdups for getting those assets back to the owners of those assets rather than involving them in potential losses through the bankruptcy. Ask the body's favorable consideration for introduction.
Thank you. Roll call.
Introduction, Senate File 96, Anderson. I, Baldwin. I, Barlow. I, Whitman. I, Boner. I, Bouchard. I, Brennan. I, Case. I, Cooper. I, Dockstetter. I, Ellis. I, French. I, Furphy. I, Guru. I, Hicks. I, Hutchings. I, Ide. I, Jones. I, Kinsky. I, Cole. I, Landon. I, Larson. I, McEwen. I, Nethercott. I, Pappas. I, Rothfuss. I, Salazar. I, Schuler. I, Scott. I, Steinmetz. I, President Driscoll.
Aye.
Aye. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 96, 31 aye.
Senate File 96, having received approval of 2/3 of the elected members, Senate File 96 is referred to Committee Number 9, Minerals. Senate File 97, first reading of Senate File.
Senate File 97, Prohibition on Distribution of Unsolicited Ballot Forms, sponsored by Senator Hutchings.
Senator Hutchings.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This bill was one that we ran last year. You're all pretty familiar with it. It's a bill that I'd like to move. House Senate File 97, a prohibition on distribution of unsolicited ballot forms. The bill regards sending out the proper sending out of absentee ballot forms from the county clerk or the Secretary of State's office. But I must apologize to the body that when this bill was getting drafted, the final agency that looked at the bill made a change. And I wasn't aware of it until yesterday that they left out a sentence that I think is important to have put in the bill. So with that, Mr. Chairman, if the body is favorable to this bill moving forward, I would like to submit that amendment to whatever committee you send it to. And that's pretty much it, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Roll call.
Introductory vote, Senate File 97, Anderson. I, Baldwin. I, Barlow. No, Whitman. I, Boner. I, Bouchard. I, Brennan. I, Case. I, Cooper. I, Dockstetter. I, Ellis. I, French. Aye. Murphy. Aye. Guru. Aye. Hicks. Aye. Hutchings.
Aye.
Aye. Ide. Aye. Jones. Aye. Kinsky. Aye. Cole. Aye. Landon. Aye. Larson. Aye. McEwen. Aye. Nethercott. Aye. Pappas. Aye. Rothbus. No. Salazar. Aye. Schuler. Aye. Scott. Aye. Steinmetz. Aye. President Driscoll.
Aye.
Aye. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 97, 29 aye, 2 no.
Senate File 97, having received two-thirds majority for introduction vote, is assigned to Committee Number 7, Corporations. Senate File 100, first reading of the Senate File.
Senate File 100, prompt payment of insurance claims, sponsored by Senator Hutchings.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to move for introduction, Senate File 100, prompt payment of insurance claims. Members of the body, this is probably the most, or the easiest PBM bill that I've been involved with, and I hope you'll see the same. This is just dealing with prompt payment of claims. When you receive a service from somebody, they always expect prompt payment, and our precious pharmacists are not receiving their payment and for the services that they've rendered within 21 to 30 days, 21 to 30 day time frame. This bill also includes the insurer's contracted intermediary regarding accountability for payments of approved services. It has an interest rate to be paid to the pharmacy for late payment, and authorizes the Wyoming Department of Insurance authorize and enforce rules and regulations for the insured compliance. Very simple bill. I'd ask for your favorable aye vote on it, and I'd like to also thank the body for the aye votes on the other bills. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Chief Clerk will call the roll.
For introduction, Senate File 100, Anderson. Aye. Aye. Baldwin. Aye. Barlow. Aye. Beitman. Aye. Boner. Aye. Bouchard. Aye. Brennan. Aye. Aye. Case. Aye. Cooper. Aye. Aye. Dockstetter. Aye. Ellis. Aye. French. Aye. Murphy. Aye. Aye. Guru. Aye. Hicks. Aye. Aye. Hutchings.
Aye.
Aye. Ide. Aye. Jones. Aye. Kinsky. Holt.
Aye.
Aye. Landon. Aye. Larson. Aye. McEwen. Aye. Nethercott. Aye. Pappas. Aye. Rothbus. Aye. Salazar. Aye. Schuler. Aye. Scott. Aye. Steinmetz. Aye. Kinsky. Aye. President Driscoll.
Aye.
Aye. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 100, 31 aye.
Senate File 100, having received approval of two-thirds of the elected members, is approved for introduction. Senate File 100 is referred to Committee Number 7, Corporations. Senate File 103, first reading of the Senate File.
Senate File 103, Wyoming Crime Act, sponsored by Senator Salazar.
Senator Salazar.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I move for introduction of Senate File 103 and ask for your aye vote. Honorable members, this is a continuation of the idea that we had last year that we voted for overwhelmingly, which was the Food Freedom Act. First of all, I'll ask you to take a look at the names of the sponsors of this bill. You won't normally see this sweeping number of names from different chambers and different political philosophies, but this is a bill that I bring forward with a great deal of popularity, particularly with our constituents. So what the Wyoming Prime Act does, it allows our local farmers and ranchers to sell their meat products without USDA approval. There are a number of restrictions and sidebars to this, not least of which is that they will still need to go to a slaughterhouse where there are state inspections. The other thing I want to mention to you is that these meats, and you can find them on the bill on page 3, we're dealing with cattle, sheep, swine, goats. This is a bill that I truly believe is supported by our constituents. It's keeping meats, those grown within the state of Wyoming. It cannot be sold outside the state. You know, as rising food prices continue to rise, here is an opportunity to give freedom to our farmers and ranchers to sell their products locally and to keep those dollars locally. And this, I believe, is a mechanism not only to give greater freedom to our farmers and ranchers, but to also help with those inflation rates of so many people who are challenged by the price of beef. Finally, I will say this. This bill will not take effect and cannot take effect until the US Congress passes the federal Prime Act. It's only contingent on Congress passing the Prime Act. The Prime Act is before Congress now, and I will tell you that our Congresswoman is a co-sponsor of that Prime Act. So I ask for your favorable vote. I ask that you let this go through, and if there are questions, let's work it. But quite frankly, given the number of sponsors and who they are, I think there's a great deal of support for this. So I ask for your aye vote. Thank you, Mr. President.
Roll call.
For introduction, Senate File 103, Anderson. Aye. Baldwin. Aye. Barlow. Aye. Beitman. Aye. Boner. Aye. Bouchard. Aye. Brennan. Aye. Aye. Case. No. Cooper. Aye. Dockstader. Aye. Ellis. Aye. French. Aye. Furphy. Aye. Baruch. Aye. Hicks. Aye. Hutchings. Aye. Ide. Aye. Jones. Aye. Kinsky. Aye. Cole. Aye. Landon. Aye. Larson. Aye. McEwen. Aye. Nethercott. Aye. Pappas. Aye. Rothfuss. Aye. Salazar. Aye. Schuler. Aye. Scott. Conflict. Steinmetz. Aye. President Driscoll.
Aye.
Aye. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 103, 29 aye, 1 no, 1 conflict.
Senate File 103, having received the required approval of 2/3 of the elected members, is passed introduction. Senate File 103 is referred to Committee Number 5, Agriculture. Senate File 105, first reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 105, Wyoming Second Amendment Financial Privacy Act, sponsored by Representative Larson. I'm sorry, Senator Larson.
You almost got a promotion. So. Senator Larson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for introduction, Senate File 105, and ask for your favorable consideration. If you remember back in 2022, I guess, there was 28 federal congressional members who wrote a letter to the 3 major credit card processing networks, asking them to track firearm and ammunition sales. The reason for this bill I could go through more on that, and the bill actually tells you some facts that were about the bill. This bill would prohibit the misuse of payment card processing systems to surveil, report, or otherwise discourage constitutionally protected firearm and ammunition purchases and the sales within this state. So that's the major point of the bill. Let's not let these, if they did track these, let's not let them use them against us. So I ask for your favorable consideration for the bill.
Thank you. Roll call.
Introduction vote, Senate File 105, Anderson. Aye. Baldwin. Aye. Barlow. Aye. Beitman. Aye. Boner. Aye. Bouchard. Aye. Brennan. Aye. Case. Aye. Cooper. Aye. Dockstetter. Aye. Ellis. Aye. French. Aye. Murphy. Aye. Guru. Aye. Hicks. Aye. Hutchings. Aye. Ide. Aye. Jones. Aye. Kinsky. Aye. Holb. Aye. Landon. Aye. Larson. Aye. McEwen. Aye. Nethercott. Aye. Pappas. Aye. Rothfuss. Aye. Salazar. Aye. Schuler. Aye. Scott. Aye. Steinmetz. Aye. President Driscoll.
Aye.
Aye. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 105, 31 aye.
Senate File 105, having received the required approval of 2/3 of the elected members, Senate File 105 is referred to Committee Number 1, Judiciary. Senate File 106, introductory.
Senate File 106, Wyoming State Guard Amendments, sponsored by Senator Larson.
Senator Larson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for introduction, Senate File 106. The Wyoming State Guard is already recognized in Wyoming statutes, Title 19, Chapters 8 and 10, as a state military force that can be organized and utilized at the discretion of the governor. There is also a separate and distinct chapter of the Wyoming National Guard, Chapter 9. These amendments simply update our statutes to bring them in line with current federal law in these two areas. The State Guard can be organized and maintained without reference to the status or deployment of the Wyoming National Guard. And the federal government provides no support or exercises no authority over the State Guard. And the reference to the federal government in this chapter is removed. The bill does not require or suggest the State Guard be organized. It simply clarifies and streamlines the governor's authority to do so if he chooses. The purpose of the State Guard, as seen in 22 other states at this time, is simply to act in supporting role of the National Guard in its state missions. And I want to emphasize that it is a supporting role to the National Guard for protection of life and property, emergency relief and support, search and rescue, maintenance of vital public services, and to support civil authorities in other roles assigned by the governor and the adjutant general. Strength, capabilities, and standards for the State Guard would be defined by the governor and the Council of Defense, which the statute requires him to appoint. There is no precedent to suggest that it would be or should be mirror the National Guard in size, equipment, or mission capabilities. State Guards in other states are primarily volunteer organizations compensated only when placed in active duty under orders of the governor by specific missions. This is specified already in Wyoming Statute Title 19. As is this case with the law enforcement reserves, volunteer firefighters, and county search and rescue teams, they would not receive pay for time spent in training. Administrative training and equipment costs can be approached creatively to minimize the financial burden to the state. I want to emphasize that the State Guard would be a backup to the National Guard if the majority of the National Guard was ever deployed or additional manpower was needed in the crisis. Wouldn't it be great if there was an additional trained, structured, and organized individuals available? Also, it needs to be stated that no National Guard monies or equipment would be transferred or used unless the governor initiated it. The State Guard could be a versatile, effective tool for Wyoming. The
10
governor
seconds.
needs clear authority to organize it in advance of the need. And that is the sole intent of Senate File 106.
Thank you. Roll call.
Introduction. Anderson? No. Baldwin? No. Barlow? Aye. Beitman? Aye. Boner? Aye. Bouchard? Aye. Brennan? Aye. Case? No. Cooper? No. Dockstetter? Aye. Ellis? Aye. French? Aye. Murphy? No. Guru? No. Hicks? Aye. Hutchings? Aye. Ide? Aye. Jones? Aye. Kinsky? Aye. Cole? Landon? No. Larson? Aye. McEwen? Aye. Nethercott? Aye. Pappas? No. Rothfuss? No. Salazar? Aye. Schuler? No. Scott? Aye. Steinmetz? Aye. Cole? Aye. President Driscoll?
Aye.
Aye. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 106, 21 aye, 10 no.
Senate File 106, having received the required approval of 2/3 of elected members, is approved for introduction. Senate File 106 is referred to Committee Number 2, Appropriations. So got a clarification from LSO Legal bill deadlines. Your bills have to be finalized with all co-sponsors and actually approved for numbering by noon. I'm going to stand us at ease to the gavel for 10 minutes for anybody that has to go finalize and get it done. But we'll come back at 11:30 for second reading.
Start everything on, and next time we stay probably somebody needs to get a freaking microphone, everybody knows when we started. Yeah, we had Cowboy Joe, I know. And we picked people on, all we do was clap. So we were all on beat, at the wrong time. It was like a round, but they were really two people. We clearly should have, in hindsight, I think we need to. Yeah. Be right. That's right. Good thing I spent a lot of time. That was our worst. Really? Because we are a song. Yeah. I grew up. Yeah. I'm his grandson, so congratulations. He's about as nice a guy as you. Yes, sir. Lots of nice. Yeah, that's what I like about my own. 36.
Reports from standing committees.
February 13, 2024. Mr. Presidential Committee Number 3, Revenue, to whom was referred Senate File 55, Board of Equalization, questions before the board. Respectfully report same back to the Senate for the recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Beitman, French, Ide, McEwen, and Pappas. Senator Beitman, Chairman. February 13, 2024, Mr. Presidential Committee Number 7, Corporations, Elections, and Political Subdivisions, to whom is referred Senate File 21, Public Utilities Net Power Cost Sharing Ratio. Respectfully report same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes, Senators Boner, Case, Landon, and Scott. No, Senator Barlow. Senator Case, Chairman. February 14, 2024, Mr. Presidential Committee Number 1, Judiciary, to whom was referred Senate File 36, Uniform Child Abduction Prevention Act. Respectfully report same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Case, Cooper, Furphy, Landon, and Schuler. Senator Landon, Chairman. February 14, 2024, Mr. Presidential Committee Number 1, Judiciary, to whom was referred Senate File 30, Influencing Jurors and Witnesses, Judges Amendment. Respectfully report same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes, Senators Case, Cooper, Furphy, Landon, and Schuler. Senator Landon, Chairman. February 14, 2024, Mr. Presidential Committee Number 1, Judiciary, to whom was referred Senate File 35, Public Records, DOC Investigations. Respectfully report same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes, Senators Cooper, Furphy, Landon, and Schuler. No, Senator Case. Senator Landon, Chairman. February 14, 2024, Mr. Presidential Committee Number 10, Labor, Health, and Social Services, to whom is referred Senate File 4, Rehiring Retired Firefighters, Continued Retirement Benefits. Respectfully report same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Baldwin, Barlow, Bouchard, Dockstader, and Hutchings. Senator Baldwin, Chairman. February 14, 2024, Mr. Presidential Committee Number 10, Labor, Health, and Social Services, to whom is referred Senate File 8, Health Insurance for Volunteer Emergency Responders. Respectfully report same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Baldwin, Barlow, Bouchard, Dockstader, and Hutchings. Senator Baldwin, Chairman.
Thank you, Randy. Bills on second reading. Senate File 2, second reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 2, Legislative Budget, an act relating to appropriations for the legislature, sponsored by the Management Council.
There is amendments. Do we have the amendment? First Amendment read in?
Senate File 2, second reading amendment number 1, page 3, line 21, after.
Senator Hicks.
Mr. President, I move second reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 2 and ask for your favorable consideration. Mr. President, so explanation. So we have had in the last year a number of instances doing with primarily federal process and federal issues and stuff, the need for legislators to travel around the country to represent the interests of the state of Wyoming. I'm at least aware of at least 2 or 3 of these things. And they are acting in the official capacity of the state sometimes. What this would effectively allow, and it's a clarification because right now it could be determined under the existing structure and the rules for management council, they could approve this. But I just want to make sure, Mr. President, that it's explicitly clear that if some legislature is acting on behalf of the state in their official capacity, that they could seek approval from management council for reimbursements for those expenses. It would also allow management council the ability to provide travel expenses and reimbursement for legislators and legislative committees that are meeting with other states or other state committees. And the purpose of that, Mr. President, is to better coordinate on those issues that we have common with many of our neighbors out there. And that the Management Council, upon approval, if a committee wanted to meet with a like committee of a number of other states, they could come to Management Council and ask for that approval for those cost reimbursements. Mr. President, I'd stand for any questions.
Senator Drew.
Thank you, Mr. President. Question for the bringer. Who decides what is in the best interest of the state? Does that mean if you're attached to a committee or a task force, or is it just if I decide I'm doing something in the best interest of the state of Wyoming and I'm a senator, so I can go take a trip somewhere, I have to ask Management Council, but I'm just trying to figure where the bar is for that. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I appreciate this amendment and the intent of it. There's probably two things, clarifications I would like. Well, one clarification and then one maybe further request is one, I think clarification whether it's pre-trip, pre-authorization, or if it can be post. There are often times, and I've done some things that I went on a trip and said, this is really a benefit to the state. I paid the bill. I did all those things. So there's a pre and post issue. The second thing is when we do these things, and I think this probably should go for all of the things we do in our budget that has out-of-state legislative travel. I think there ought to be actually a report back to the legislature. I think we actually ought to be accountable for what we learned or when we bring something back so that our colleagues and the citizens of Wyoming can actually understand maybe what we gained or were disappointed by or whatever. So while that's not in this bill, I just put that out there for folks to consider. I've been to many meetings for various different issues, et cetera. And I always try to report back to the committee if it was a committee related issue, but I think we ought to have something more formal. And I've held that position even during my 4 years on Management Council, was never able to actually get it implemented, but something for the body to consider. And I thank this, the bringer of this amendment for the amendment. Thank you.
Senator Rothfuss.
Thanks, Mr. President. I'm for the amendment. In my time in the Management Council, we've obviously done this. We've done it before and after. We've done it for all sorts of purposes. We've done it whenever it seemed like there was a significant interest by a legislator, whether that's attending a conference in another state about Colorado River or whether that's additional training or really anything. Clarifying it is fine. The only concern I have is if there's any restriction in here that I'm not seeing beyond what we do now, that would be my only worry. So I'd ask the bringer if he sees this as further limiting in any way. I don't read it that way. I think it's just clarification. So at this point, I'd support it, but that's my one concern because I think what we do now already works pretty well in terms of just approving people's requests on a case-by-case basis based on a justification that is relevant to their service in the legislature.
Biden.
Thank you, Mr. President. Along those lines, I like where this is going. I was curious as whether or not there's been discussion to allow each legislator a travel budget that they can use per biennium as they see fit to go to conferences, to meet with other legislators, to work on legislation from across the country. And if that's been discussed and if that's something that may be a possibility down the road. Thank you.
Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I guess I would like, since I've never served on Management Council, to also maybe just get my arms around what kind of approvals they provide. I recall one time making a request. I hadn't gone to a CSG or NCSL meeting, and there was another conference I was interested in attending. And so I approached Management Council, and I believe they approved that, which was great. And I learned a lot. But I am wondering, is it to attend conferences? And I'm just wanting to pinpoint that. I guess my concern is, just how open-ended this could be. I know we've got a wonderful congressional delegation. They often ask people to testify. I had the opportunity to do that a number of years ago, but I did it remotely. And so I am worried that this is going to start turning into a trip to Washington, D.C. For the furtherance, we as a body are speaking, but we don't get a chance to review that testimony. So we don't know what it says. And that becomes a forum for not advancing maybe the interests of the state, but advancing your own personal interests. So I am a little concerned about this and where it's heading if we don't tighten it up a little bit.
Senator Larson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I am in support of this amendment. I have gone to the Management Council before to ask to go to some conferences and been denied. And I hope this opens it up a little bit more to allow it. So I'm for the amendment.
Senator Dockstader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Appreciate the consideration. I might use it. But in a couple of decades of service, I've made countless trips on my own dollar, on my own time, and just taking care of it because that's what I was elected to do. I don't go ask anybody for any money. I belong to a member-owned co-op. I make countless trips for them on my own time and on my own dollar. I appreciate this consideration, may use it, but it doesn't factor in on the many countless trips I make to Cheyenne for my constituency. We opened up this session with a difficult topic. Last May, that took me up to Gillette to talk to my leadership on my own time and my own dollar. I'm going to continue doing it regardless because we have a job to do. To sit there and say to the public, you've got to reimburse me for everything? No, I'm just going to keep doing my job. My wife wishes I would reach into the state coffers a little more because she's tired of handling it in the family budget. But that's what I do. That's what we got elected to do. Get in your truck, go drive, get your pocketbook out, and you pay for it and you do your job. Don't expect the taxpayer to pick up everything. Just go do your job. Thank you.
Senator Roth.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, and good debate on this topic. And honestly, this is something that there are a lot of management council policies related to, and if there's interest in reviewing those policies on how travel is decided, it's in the handbook right now, and it can be revisited. So that's a matter of coming to management council meetings, bringing motions and saying, hey, let's look at how these decisions are made. Kind of getting to some of the questions and issues that have been raised with regard to the good senator from Sheridan's question about whether budgets have just been contemplated. Yes, actually, I've advocated for that on management council for at least a decade. That hasn't gone particularly well, but I do think that there's a lot of merit to that because we know that some members do use their CSG and NCSL allotment of trips. Other members would prefer to do what I think the good senator from the western part of the state was referring to a moment ago, traveling to specific engagements around the state that might be more relevant to them. And that was what I've advocated for, was finding a budget that's appropriate and then living within that budget almost regardless of interest, as long as it was consistent with your work in office. Getting to some of the discussion about what decisions are made and how those decisions are made from the senator from here in Laramie County. In the time that I've been on management council, there's only been a handful probably of requests that haven't been approved, and they tend to be to conferences that are deemed partisan or in some way more political than either informative, general, or again, the NCSL and CSG nonpartisan are previously approved. Those are decisions that even in themselves are kind of political, right? Because it's the management council deciding whether it's political. So just take that into consideration. Not everybody agrees, but more often than not, I would say 80%, 85% of those requests end up being granted, particularly if there have not already been 2 trips in that year, right? The management council policy is currently written that each legislator is entitled to 2 trips and per year. CSG West and NCSL are automatics. And if you want a different trip, then that is subject to approval. There are other trips, actually, the Energy Council and the State Legislative Leadership Foundation are also automatic approvals. Anything else requires approval under the current policy. But again, Mr. President, I'll just reiterate, that's a policy. That is simply the way it is now because that's what the Management Council voted on, subject to change at any point. Honestly, regardless of this particular statutory revision, it would still be subject to policy. So all of that is fair to debate, open ground. We could certainly change it so that there's just a general travel budget. But Mr. President, I do think it's important, even though we do take on a lot of responsibility for travel ourselves, to recognize that not all citizens of the state are going to be equally capable of accessing travel funds to represent their constituents. And so we do have some responsibility if we want to keep this a citizens legislature and don't want to turn it into the rich get to travel and those that aren't as wealthy don't get to travel. So I think it's appropriate for us to have a policy that recognizes this type of travel. Sorry to go on for a little while, but in terms of history, the impetus for this section was probably 8 years ago or 9 years ago, as the good majority leader was discussing, with some concepts of travel to Taiwan and travel on behalf of the state of Wyoming with a delegation perhaps, and ensuring that the legislators had access to funds for those types of special trips. And again, largely for economic diversification or engaging with the executive branch so that it wouldn't have to come out of the traditional two-trip budget. There was a special budget set aside at that time that is no longer in Senate File 2 because there's enough funds traditionally in the regular budget for travel and the contingency fund that is built into the budget to cover any needs that have happened since then. So about probably 5 years ago, that line item vanished, but the policy remains. So that's a little bit of the history and answer to the questions. Again, a lot of that goes a little outside the scope of this, but I think it targets the issues that were addressed and raised, and happy to chat more. I'm out of speech, but happy to chat more later if anybody has any more questions about that policy.
Senator Hicks.
Yeah, Mr. President, just try to hit.
Senator Case.
Sorry for the point of order, but I think we're in second reading and we need to follow our second reading rules about time and number of times a person can address. And if a sponsor of amendment wants to make sure that they're the last speaker the second time. And I think that would be good for the order of the body.
Thank you. Point well taken. Yes, where I was at, I think sponsor's about to rise for a second time. They'll stop the debate. But I think that's where we're at, correct? Senator Hicks.
Yeah, Mr. President, and I think this has been outstanding discussion for those that have never sat on management council to get an idea of some of the things and where some of your money is when you approve this budget, how that may or may not be expended. But Mr. President, I'm not going to go into, I think the minority floor leader did a lot of explanation of some of the history and why some of this is in here. This is for more than any other reason for you guys in the body to look at this and say, you know, it's been kind of a policy. Let's tighten that policy up and give you an opportunity to say what you'd like to see management council doing in this area of approving meetings. It's already policy stated. You get to go to a number of these the bipartisan events with CSG, NCL, and you get 2 personal trips that you can take above and beyond that. Those go to management council right now. I just wanted to make sure that when we start trying to represent the interests of the state of Wyoming, and it's a committee or we want to meet with another committee, it provides additional clarification that this is something that this body, and I hope the legislature says, yeah, we endorse that action by management council. Specific to a couple of questions, I think for my colleague from Campbell County, for the clarification, is this existing or pre-authorization? In my time in the legislature, I've seen it done both ways. I've seen people go and they go, you know, that was really just completely legislative work that I was doing. And I didn't think about it at the time because this issue came up really rapidly, and come back to management council and say, would you consider? But it's still up to the approval of management council. And I think that's the important thing. To my colleague from Teton County is this, it still requires approval of management council to go to these meetings. It's just not all of a sudden the committee decides they're going to go meet with their surrounding state. Still requires approval. I think my minority floor leader, this was not to provide additional restrictions. I've tried not to do that. I've tried a clarification. I do like the idea that the representative from Campbell or the senator from Campbell County brought up. I've always advocated that if you're going to do a special trip, you should bring a report back. I think that's an obligation you have, but it certainly would be considered, in my opinion, as a favorable third reading amendment to this. But if you do one of these special trips, as a request to Management Council, that you do provide the legislative body some level of response associated with what happened. Was there any positions? I think that's really good. Just helps justify the Management Council's action of sending you in the first place, but provides a record of the actions associated with that. To my good senator and friend from the western part of the state, he probably spends more time on his dime than anybody in the legislature. But to the specific issue of meeting with constituents and stuff, we do have built in every quarter, you guys get a contribution for a constituent service allowance. And we know, depending on how big your district is, I have some familiarity with that. It very rarely covers the amount of travel that you have to deal with. We do have an obligation. And so that's something that we're going to absorb. This policy wasn't to address that. That's just the fact of being an elected representative, that those are kind of going to occur. I hope that answered the questions. If it's not, well, I guess we don't have another question. But I do think this is another reading. This was a purposeful intent to get direction from this body to support the actions of Management Council. But ask for your favorable consideration.
Question being called. Do a voice vote. This is on second reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 2. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Second reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 2 has passed the Senate. We have another amendment. We have read in, please.
Senate File 2, second reading amendment number 2, page 11 after line 18, insert.
Senator Hicks.
Mr. President, I would move second reading amendment number 2 to Senate File number 2 and ask for your favorable considerations. So members of the committee, your Management Council on often is presented with issues during the interim and suggestions on how to do that. In my time in the legislature, there's been some establishment of task force by Management Council. And I can recall at least one instance where there was a particular piece of legislation that failed, could not pass the legislative body. And so Management Council became a super legislative body, and they brought that back through an action of Management Council to form a task force, even though the legislature rejected the bill. And quite frankly, Mr. President, I found that methodology and actions by Management Council questionably constitutional. Ethically, I think it was probably the incorrect thing to do. If you can't pass the legislature, Management Council should not been using their position as your representatives to go do something that couldn't pass the body to begin with. Now, Mr. President, there is absolutely a necessity that Management Council has to have the ability to establish task force. And I think back of an issue here a couple of years ago where we had a large mining county up there that employs a lot of people, that closed the doors. It was tens of millions of dollars of lost tax revenue associated with that. Management Council acted appropriately of setting up a task force to deal with that issue because we're not in session. So what I'm trying to do is, again, say historically, I think sometimes Management Council has gone off the rails and said, if we can't get something passed in the legislature, let's just form our own task force. Again, I don't think that's the appropriate process. I do think there's times that Management Council needs that authority, and that's what I've tried to address in the bill. It just says that no funds will be expended for the creation of a task force of legislators and non-legislative members unless it's by 2/3 of the vote of Management Council and it's deemed that we have an emergency exists. So it affords that opportunity if there's something dire consequences that happen in the interim, that Management Council, if they need to form these task forces, certainly have that ability to do so. It just has to be for emergency purposes, and it has to have 2/3 majority vote of management council to determine there's an emergency and to establish the task force. Let's stand for any questions.
Is there another comment?
Thank you, Mr. President. You know, I think it's really important to be understanding this amendment if it's in response to a specific event that has happened recently, or if it really is a systemic problem with management council. As the one non-leadership member of management council, it is a very unique dynamic. So you have the president of the Senate that is a member, the majority floor leader of the Senate that is a member, and you have the vice president that is a member. You have the minority floor leader that is a member, and then a random senator. The House is the same composition. The speaker, the whip, the floor leader, minority floor leader over there, and then a random representative. And so when you have a majority vote of management council, it is your president and your speaker and typically, and all of that leadership structure telling you they want a task force. Primarily in my observation is now in this unique circumstance, I think there was a bill that didn't get passed. But my observation is this big picture. There's so much going on and they're so busy that some of the needs that need to be managed don't have the ability to do that until immediately after session and management council comes together. But what I think uniquely you're doing is you're eliminating a tool in the toolbox for your elected leaders of both chambers. And so if there's concern about your elected leaders in both chambers going off the rails, that may be the issue as opposed to authorizing management council to make certain decisions regarding work of the legislature that would be public and transparent and interim and putting, you know, our legislative duties to task. So I just want to kind of put that layer in perspective of who really is asking for these task forces, and that may be the solution to the problem as opposed to management council itself.
There's Scott.
Mr. President, on and for the amendment. Mr. President, I raised a concern on the committee of the whole about the growth we're having in some of our special task forces and some of the demands they're putting on legislators that are taking us away from being a pure citizen legislature. I think this amendment is a very balanced approach to dealing with the source of some of the worst problems that we've seen over the years. I think it preserves the ability of the leadership when there is a genuine crisis and there is a full consensus that we got to do something. Preserves their ability to do that, Mr. President. And I think this solves the problem very nicely, or at least is a major help in solving the problem. And I urge the adoption of the amendment.
Mayor Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I want to make reference to a couple of things, Mr. President. First of all, that fifth member from each body is not a random senator or representative. They are elected by the body to represent the body on that. And I think by that definition itself, or that fact itself, they are one of our leaders. They've been chosen by the body to participate. So I don't know that that's random. I think that's more intentional. The second thing about the growth of committees, and I was on management council for 4 years, and we had numerous things, is members can say no. Members can say no. My plate is too full, etc. Now, I can look through the list of committees and the assignments that some of our colleagues have, and know that some folks never say no. And that is it's admirable if they're able to do that. But it does put a burden. And guess what? If you want to get something done, what do you ask? Who do you ask? You ask a busy person, because they're going to get it done. And we've heard some of that testimony today. But finally, I'm going to make maybe a technical so those are two just general comments. I'm going to make something technically make a technical observation here. that then maybe the sponsor or someone else who's more tenured than I on management council will refer to. This only speaks to task force, which is a legislative, non-legislative member body. This does not speak to a pure new legislative subcommittee, working group, whatever else. So I'm just curious about that because I believe in my early tenure on management council in the legislature, there were some of those created in response to requests. The task force issue, because it often includes members of the executive branch, I recognize this is a valuable tool and I would applaud that. But I don't know that this is actually, this is guarding out one thing or putting a limit on one thing, but is it actually speaking to some of the other possibilities that are out there, intentionally or unintentionally? Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Rothfuss.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Mr. President, excuse me. Mr. President, on and against, and I understand the intent here, but I guess one of the concerns that I have is, we're used to legislating in the budget and we criticize that quite frequently, and we'll do that a little bit later, probably next week. This is then legislating in the feed bill, which is again, a policy budget that I don't know that this policy debate really belongs in. And in fact, there are statutory provisions about what the management council is supposed to do. And one of the things it's supposed to do actually is from time to time, assemble task forces and working groups, et cetera. I don't remember what the exact language is, but literally it's supposed to do this to address small problems. That's in statute. So it seems to me that if this is an issue that we want to resolve and debate, that we should actually have a piece of legislation to resolve and debate this particular issue independent from the legislative feed bill. I wouldn't want the feed bill to be a contentious bill that some people support and some people don't support because we've got some policy revisions related to task forces. This probably doesn't rise to that level and hopefully it wouldn't, but it comes to the core issue of why we try not to set policy in budget bills. And at the same time, as far as the 2/3 vote, I just will kind of point out that right now, the management council is comprised of 10 members. It takes 6 members, 6 ayes to pass something. 2/3 is 0.66, so it takes you up to 7. It's just one extra member. That's what we're talking about here. Not necessarily that significant, but a lot of the decision-making that we do comes down to a majority rule, and I guess I'm not compelled that this is a special circumstance that rises to the 2/3 level. You think about when we use 2/3, changing rules, throwing somebody out of the chamber. There's a lot of pretty strict things that earn that 2/3, and it's taken very seriously. And the idea that somehow we need a 2/3 for this, I guess is counter to democratic principles that we typically operate under in a committee. So for those reasons, I'm against this. But again, at the end of the day, it really is just taking the number from 6 to 7. So it's perhaps not that consequential.
For my second time.
Last time this proposed debate.
So if I can just answer a few questions, I would say, first, I'm a little confused with my colleague, the minority floor leader, with legislating in the feed bill that funds the legislature. It is a budget bill, but it's not a general appropriations for the running of government. It's for the legislature. But I thought we just did that and had the support of the minority floor leader with the previous amendment. So I'm a little confused on that position, how I could support one amendment, but not this one when they substantively do the same thing. With regards to, we are elected, some of us because of our positions, and there's one member elected here, but we were elected to represent you guys. We weren't elected to not allow you to use your vote and to represent your constituents. There's a fundamental difference. What our responsibility is elected to represent you and then take a position to deny you the ability to actually exercise your vote as a member of the legislature. And I can tell you specifically, that's happened on a number of occasions. And quite recently, it's happened a couple of times. I'm not going to allude to those right now as far as specifically what happened. So let me give you an example of the extra jurisdictional legislative body that I've seen in the management council. So many of you have been chairman out here, right? you a chairman of a committee, you're obligated to post the agenda of your meeting on the public site so people are understanding what we're going on, and transparency. You as chairman know that if you just all of a sudden, at the last minute, without any public notice, decided that and nobody on management council that knew it except for just a couple of them, usually it's a few, decide that they want to create a task force. Wasn't noticed. Other members of the task force weren't aware of it. So, Mr. President, this has gone on. And in my opinion, in those circumstances, they've taken the vote away from you as your leaders. And that's all I'm trying to do is say, look, folks, let's make management council adhere to a certain standard to respect your vote. And that's all I'm trying to get here with this, to say, look, make sure the people that are representing you are representing you. I'm not afraid to let you vote on issues when it comes to the formations of the task force. So, Mr. Chairman, on and for the amendment, look forward to any clarifications. I did not address my colleague from Campbell County's concerns. This is much broader than task force. My experience is it's probably been task force, in my opinion. It's probably been the area most outside of consistent decorum and procedures of allowing the members of this body to participate in these decisions in the formations of task force. Thank you, Mr. President.
Question being called. This will be a voice vote. We're voting on second reading amendment number 2 on Senate File 2. All in favor, say aye. Those opposed, no. Motion is passed. Second reading amendment number 2 to Senate File 2 has passed the Senate. Senate File 2 having been read 2 separate times. The question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. Senator Case.
Privilege of the floor.
Granted.
Mr. President, it's come to my attention, when we talk on our microphones here, when our microphones are turned on and it's broadcast through our internet capabilities, that's kind of our official proceedings, and that's what people have access to. But it's come to my attention that there is recordings in process from the gallery of our proceedings right now, which of course is fine. That's the old way they used to do it. But it appears that the technology might be capable of picking up your conversations when we are not in session, or the conversations that aren't on the microphone. So I'm cautioning the senators and the staff with their conversations on this floor to not presume that with electronic enhancement that your discussions may be being picked up. And out of respect for each other and respect for the process, and I'd like the officers of this session to look into whether the recording that's underway right now is in the interest of the Senate. Thank you.
Senator Case, I will check. I believe, and I'm going to have staff check into it, I believe the presiding officer can actually ban the equipment. I will check and find out, come back.
Your microphone's not on, sir.
It is on. I'm talking. Sorry. But I do believe I have the authority to remove recording equipment upstairs. I'm going to check. I'm not going to do it until I know. We'll have staff take a look into it. Senator Drew.
To the floor. Whoops, sorry.
Granted.
Privilege floor. Yes, thank you. In the gallery up here, an old friend, long time friend, because he's not old, Evan Simpson from Star Valley, former representative, member of Select Water, chairman.
Senator, thanks for pointing that out. He was what a great member and a trusted guy that did a lot of great things on Select Water. I can't see him, so thank you from down here. So thank you. Senator Hutchins.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just wanted to make a comment on the previous body's comment. I believe it's media upstairs, and I'm not certain. I believe that's okay. Just FYI.
Perfect. No, we're going to check into it. I will tell you from where I sit, I have absolutely no problem with someone taking pictures or routine, but for actual recording and that type of devices, I do have a little heartburn considering everything is out there and open. So the body may deal with it later. We'll see what falls. Senator Case.
My concern is picking up private conversations that you think are private. And when you're not at the microphone, or we are actually in recess and sitting on the floor. And with the technology that exists today and these powerful microphones, they can zoom in on from you from wherever.
Senator Case, I think you've got a great point. For everyone out here, other than the very few, your office is right there, and you should be able to expect reasonable privacy at your desk on private conversations. I truly believe that. So we've all gone through that. Mike's being left on, and it really should have. This is not like other states that everybody has an office they can go to. So we'll support that as best we can. Thank you. Senator Doxley.
Thank you. Been patiently waiting.
Oh, I'm sorry.
My good colleague from up the canyon took my opportunity to introduce my colleague, but I will take an opportunity to, because I chair a committee that is economic development, to tell a little story about our friend Evan Simpson. 40 years ago, he was with a big engineering firm in Arizona, and they said, you can open your own office. And he says, I will open my own office, but I'll do it in my home state of Wyoming. So he found a little town out west, Afton, brought an engineering firm up, opened it up in a little cubicle, more or less, built it up into a big office building, and now the next generation that he trained, they just finished building a big building in Afton with multiple engineers. That never would have happened without a Wyoming boy saying, I'm going home to Wyoming to open up my business, and that's economic development. So I get to tell a story on my good friend Evan Simpson. Thank you.
Senator Hicks.
Waiting on you.
What? Excuse me.
I'm ready.
Senator Hicks, do you want to continue second reading, or would you like to make a motion for lunch? I can't suggest that to you, but maybe I'm hungry.
Mr. President. I move that the stand recessed until 2 p.m.
Find mine now. What do I do, Ellen? I don't have much. Announcements, thank you. Senator Boner.
Okay, thank you, Mr. President. Your Transportation Committee will meet today upon noon recess, let's say at 12:45 in Capitol Extension W2 and online to consider Senate File 15, acceptance of retrocession federal military installations, and Senate File 17, plane coordinate system amendments.
Chairman Kinski.
Mr. President, your Appropriations Committee, Committee number 2, will meet in the State Capitol Room E301 and online at, let's give ourselves a little time for lunch at 12:45. And we will consider SF 38 financial reporting amendments, SF 60 2024 large project funding, SF 90 state managed local government equity investment pool, SF 70 investment modernization state non-permanent funds, and a re-referral SF 13 federal land use plans legal actions authorized.
Senator Doxley.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your committee number 9, Minerals, Business and Economic Development, will meet upon the noon recess today. Hear the following bill: Senate File 41, Banking Division Classification and Salary Exemptions; Senate File 42, Low Carbon Reliable Energy Standard Amendments; Senate File 50, Unincorporated Nonprofit DEOs. So folks, if you would let the Minerals Committee slip in for a little lunch, and then they're due downstairs in room. Here. Well, downstairs upon the noon. Oh, room 4 and online. Thank you.
Senator Case, did you have something? Saw you up for a minute.
I did, and my screen just went blank. But we will continue the electricity bills tomorrow in corporations starting at 8 o'clock. We left one bill open that we have to finish up, and the 3 more in the electricity area will take up. And I will get you specific numbers at the closing adjournment. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senate will stand recessed till 2 p.m.
Yeah, I'll let you.